Okay, so we should be recording. Okay, so again, thank you so much for joining us. This is our first workshop of the year, our STEM workshops. We have five really exciting speakers here to share their backgrounds in STEM and tips to get into STEM advocacy and a STEM career. So we're going to start and jump into it with our first speaker, Angela Yang. So she's going to be introducing herself and her work in STEM.
Hi, I'm Angela. I'm currently a senior at Granada Hills Charter High School in North LA. A little bit about me, my involvement with Girl Up has been very heavily centered around STEM activities as I'm interested in computer science. And this upcoming year, I'm going to be serving as a Girl Up Global Teen Advisor. So I'm very excited for that role and being able to meet other girls who share a similar passion for advocacy and community work. So today I wanted to talk about how to start a Girls in STEM event, as that's something I've done countless times by now. And I hope it can offer some of you some tips if you want to pursue the same initiatives in your community. So first, I want you guys to, in the chat, write a memorable STEM opportunity you had. So that could be doing robotics, which is what I've done, participating in a hackathon, doing a science fair, whatever STEM experiences you've had that have kind of initiated an interest for you. And even if you're not a very heavy STEM person, I'm sure there's one STEM subject you might like. And so you could talk about an experience in class you might have had. And then, oh, not on your paper, but well, you can. So I guess for this, you do need 2 pieces of paper and a writing utensil. So if you have that near you, you can, or you can really just pull up a Google Doc. That also works because not everybody just has paper on hand. But yeah, so I would encourage you all to first put that in the chat, something about a STEM experience you had, and then on paper or Google Doc, writing 3 things about that experience that you, I guess, found interesting or that made it more engaging. Okay, yeah, I see some people put attending a climate conference. That's awesome. Yeah. Robotics is also really exciting. That's what I did for a couple years since 7th grade. And then academic teams. Yeah. So there's a lot of like academic teams. Like I lead my school's math team, but there are people who do science team. Yeah, and science fairs. So yeah, it's awesome. So I want you guys to keep in mind, I guess, what makes those events so engaging for you. And that's going to help us be able to develop an event that will be engaging for the girls that you are creating it for. Okay, next slide. So this is a bit about the background of girls in STEM. So obviously, while there are a lot of statistics around the presence of women in STEM, actually hearing their stories is more important. So here I put a few quotes from some women who currently work in the field. One of them is from a biomedical engineer who mentions how she was one of 4 women in a class of 25 students for engineering. And especially as she's advanced in her career, so going up to higher positions of power, there are less and less women in proportion to men. And the second one is from an MIT student. Irene mentions how in her first class at MIT, there was really just a huge wave of male students, but very few women. And so hearing how these experiences can kind of mirror how we often feel in a field that's male dominated is certainly motivation to get younger girls engaged in the field, especially while they have greater confidence and while they have the potential and the free time to be able to explore different avenues. Next slide. So even though women do often feel alone in having such a small proportion represented in STEM, it's obvious that events do make a difference. So one of the most famous ones is the Grace Hopper Conference. And that's kind of an annual gathering that takes place between women and technology, where they gather in person to network, to hear from the latest work that they have been doing. And so, as you can see from that quote up there, it's definitely a testament to how it can give women the ability to feel like they're in a community rather than they're kind of pushing on their own. And obviously, as the second quote states, the importance of gender diversity in technology reflects itself on a variety of ways. For instance, being able to have women's opinions reflected in the technology we develop, or just ensuring that, for instance, when we develop social media, we're mindful of how different concerns surrounding body image or just other, I guess, typically issues that more disproportionately affect women are taken into account. Next. Okay, so this is an example of an event I held. So near my house, there's a center called the LAPD PAL Center. And essentially what they do is they offer students after school enrichment programs. So over this last summer, I had a team of girls and over the span of 4 days, we hosted a STEM to Solve summer camp. And that got the girls engaged in problem solving and STEM at the same time, with a focus on the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And that's just one way where you're able to get girls engaged with the field, but also show them that STEM is much more powerful than just innovation, and that it can expand out to innovating for others as well. Oh, next. Yeah. So here are a few examples of some like all girl STEM opportunities you can create. So I just left these there for you to think about. You can also look into the chat as well, as there are people put down a lot of different ideas. I see robotics. There's with like the first Lego League, which is what I also did in middle school. Doing an experiment on bacteria from keyboards. That's really interesting. And then like forensic science, computer science. So there's so many different fields in STEM. That's what makes it so exciting. So I put a couple of traditionally co-ed opportunities within STEM, but those can easily be tailored and added in with, curriculum on gender equity to make it more tailored for young girls to be engaged into the field. Okay, so this is like a second supply you need. So I know I mentioned you could use a Google Doc for notes and all that, but if you do have a piece of paper nearby, it may be more helpful for this portion. But then again, Google Docs also work. So whatever kind of like writing document you're working on, just create 4 sections for purpose, description, goals, and materials, because that's what I first did when I was planning out all my events, and it helps a lot to get your brain's thoughts organized on what you hope to get out of the event and what it takes to get there. Oh, next. Okay, so on your piece of paper or on your Google Doc, I want you to write out the purpose. So what do you hope for participants to learn? So maybe it's important to first go back to kind of what fields you want them to learn about. That could be math, that could be all of STEM. And then what makes this event unique? So I meant this question in a way that kind of compared it to how the event might be traditionally run with boys and girls. So a science fair would be a good example. So instead of just hosting another science fair, but just for girls, like maybe you could add some sort of theme of gender equity to it, or have some sort of, women in STEM panel that happens right before the award ceremony is announced. So that would factor into purpose. Description is kind of building off that purpose and figuring out the event format. So like virtual online type of event, that would be like, is it a science fair? Is it maybe a 1-day hackathon that's like virtual? And then what does it feature? So just the different types of activities you want the participants to experience as they're going through the event. Okay, so now for goals. So goals is very crucial because that allows you to remain grounded in what you want to see out of the event. So you want to think of what are some milestones you need to achieve along the way. Do you want to get like 10 girls signed up? Is that a milestone you have? Do you want to reach out to, at least 5 local middle schools or 5 nearby elementary schools? So being very specific with the numbers and the impact you want to have is a good way to more, tangibly achieve an impact for your event. And then for materials, what do you need? Like funding, the venue, activity materials. So those are all very important factors to kind of figure out before you start actually carrying out your event. Next slide. Oh, yeah. Well, this came kind of late, but like as I said before, you do need something to write on, and hopefully you guys already have that by now. Next. Okay. This is the sharing is caring. So I'm not going to do 1-minute presentations because there seem to be a lot of people here, and we're going a little bit like overtime, I feel like, at this point. So in the chat, I want you guys to kind of maybe write down the idea you're currently thinking about. So as I mentioned before, a couple of ideas are like starting a robotics team for younger girls, doing a biology class, and then maybe even teaching them about like not just like female anatomy, but also female anatomy in the context of history. So that could be something interesting to explore. A web development workshop, robotic summer camp, etc. So in the chat now, if you guys have like started brainstorming an idea, I'd encourage you to put it in the chat, or even put something that you're kind of thinking about right now, but you're not sure. So really, honestly, any suggestion is helpful, as it can kind of allow us to better share what we've done and what we're thinking about. Oh, I love that. Yeah, forensic science experiment or forensic science event with hands-on experiments. Definitely. Yeah, yeah. Getting girls especially engaged in like very, very hands-on STEM fields like biology and chemistry is very important. So that would definitely be a very creative way to like take an existing science related activity and repurpose it for younger girls. Okay, I'll wait a little bit more. If anybody wants to add in their suggestions. Yeah, physics. An all girls introduction to coding. Yeah, yeah. That's something I've done a lot, and it's very helpful, especially like because you get to kind of retrace your own coding journey and kind of find new excitement in the activities you used to do. Yeah, mentorship panels are always helpful. For those, I usually I'll mention this later, but LinkedIn is like an amazing resource for that. Yeah, okay. Next slide. And then physics event is great too. I'm not a personal fan of physics, but it's a very engaging field, so okay, and then now making your idea a reality. So obviously, if you plan out so many different things, it is kind of hard to figure out how you're going to actually make it possible and execute that event. So for that, I kind of broke it down into 4 pillars because I'm a very like, I wouldn't say super organized, but I like categorizing things. So the first pillar would be funding. And obviously, if you're going to create an in-person event, especially, you will need supplies, and maybe you might want to like have gift cards as prizes. So for funding, you can always apply to the Girl Up project. So Girl Up offers grants up to $1,000 for girls who want to start an event in their community. The slide that I showed a few slides back about the STEM event that I started at PALS actually came from that that project funding. And you can also do other strategies like fundraising at your school or outreaching to local gender equity nonprofits, as LA is very expansive. So they certainly do have gender equity nonprofits here, and many of them likely offer some sort of grant as well. Recruitment. So that's just getting other girls to be able to kind of join in on your initiative. And so the Girl Up community platform is incredibly helpful. I'm sure a lot of you are already on it, but if you ever want to start, especially like a global event, there are so many girls there. And there's also our Girl Up SoCal coalition on there. So I'll put the link in the chat, but it's been like my biggest resource, especially in doing community events for Girl Up. And then also just, reaching out to your coalition and using social media. Those are very traditional avenues, but they're also very effective. Third one is leadership. So for me, when I was first starting the events, I didn't have a lot of experience with actually leading something new. So it was a very big journey for me, but these are a couple of resources that I found helped. So the Girl Up leadership course is certainly one way you can kind of hone your leadership skills. But on a more technical note, I would say creating like a shared team Google Drive and hosting weekly meetings at like a set date and time is kind of allows you to contribute to that consistency that makes especially large scale events more impactful and successful in the end. And then one thing I did, which is optional for you guys, is to just sort your team into divisions like logistics, outreach, and PR, public relations. And that just allows you to better delegate tasks. The last one is really quick. So, that's a link to these slides or to the slides that I just presented. So if you want to go onto that link, you can just access them afterward. And those, no, scratch that. Sorry. Those slides are from a previous presentation I did for the Girl Up STEM Innovation Lab, but they have a lot more detail about event planning and tips on running a team that, kind of coordinates a large scale event. Okay. Oh, okay. And then this is just like any questions. We don't have time for questions right now, but I have my email address there and my Instagram. So if you guys want to contact me through there, I'd be more than willing to help mentor you in your project or just give you any advice on other resources. Yeah. So I hope that was helpful to all of you, and I wish you all the best of luck in starting your events.
Thank you, Angela. It was really nice hearing from you. You can do like a virtual round of applause. But thank you. Maybe if you could add your email to the chat, that'd be good.
Yeah,
And
will do.
yeah, we have more exciting speakers coming, so we'll just move on to the next one. But thank you for sharing. We learned a lot from your experiences. So next we have Halle Bradshaw, who's part of the Girl Up team that's going to be presenting.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Let me know if it gets too loud. I'm in a coffee shop right now. And Tanya, do you want me to share my screen or do you want to do the slides?
I'll do the slides.
Perfect. Well, hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. I'm Halle. I am a Learning and Training Associate with Girl Up, and I'm running our STEM program. So it's so amazing to see events like these and things that Angela was talking about, Tanya's talking about. It's just wonderful to see all the work you're doing. So thank you for being a part of Girl Up. So I'll talk a little bit about our STEM for Social Good program broadly today, and then I can answer any questions you have. Again, let me know if you can't hear me or if my Wi-Fi goes out. So we can go to the next slide. As you all are familiar with, there are gender gaps when it comes to STEM. So most recently, there was a study showing that folks who identify as girls and women and folks who identify as boys and men have a big divide in how they approach STEM, with women and girls finding that they don't feel very welcome, they don't feel very encouraged to go into STEM. And this can have real repercussions, not only in the way that we're not as engaged in STEM as we could be, but also it contributes to the pay gap. So often STEM jobs are the highest paying jobs. And so when we see less girls and women in them, we see that they are getting paid less. And also there's such a booming industry in STEM. You know, we have so much tech coming out, so much bio tech and, you know, all the stuff that you all are familiar with. And we really want to see girls and women in those opportunities. So that's one of the hopes of STEM for Social Good, is to get girls like you, get young women involved in STEM and involved in solving some of our biggest issues of the day. So we can go to the next slide. So this is our program, STEM for Social Good. To date, we have worked with over 10,000 girls and youth, just like you all. So thank you for being a part of that. And what we really focus on with STEM for Social Good is the soft skills side. So girls who come to Girl Up are taking STEM classes. They're going on all those awesome events that you mentioned. You know, they're going to Olympiad events and competitions and mentoring panels and things like that. And so we want to supply the soft skill part of it. So what's it like to be a leader in STEM? What's it like to do public speaking, host an event like Angela was talking about? Those qualities that aren't necessarily algebra or physics, but they're still really helpful in being a leader and getting even more girls involved. So that's where we come in, and that's where our resources are really focused. Go to the next slide. So this is a super cool example that I wanted to highlight. This just came in from Anusha Asim, which she's with Girl Up Emirates. And her club came up with a machine learning artificial intelligence toolkit, and they haven't shared it yet on the community, but they're going to probably within the next few weeks. But just an example of some of the amazing things that girls are doing, like this event today. This toolkit walks girls through on how to get involved with AI and machine learning, how to host an event around it, how to do an activity. So just to get you thinking about all the different possibilities and where you might find your passion can get involved with Girl Up. Maybe you make a toolkit about something you love, or you host an event about something you want to learn more about. I saw someone put in the chat about forensic science. I think that's so cool. You can have events and career professionals come speak, and there's just so much to do. So I hope you get to brainstorm, and if you ever want to talk to somebody about what that might look like, or just bounce back on ideas, I'm always here to listen. So yeah, just a cool thing that came my way this week. We can go to the next slide. So on a more personal note, this is my experience as well, being a woman in STEM. I studied climate science as an undergrad and in grad school. And I found, just to what Angela was speaking to earlier, that as I got more involved, I went to the UN climate conference. The folks who were in the highest seats of power, who were making the largest decisions around STEM, were men. And it was interesting because in my cohort of grad students, we were all women. So I think there's a big wave of change coming. I'm sure you all are seeing it in the work you're doing and the topics you're studying. And just like Angela mentioned, just because there's folks at the power who might at the top who have the power who might look different, doesn't mean that there's not change coming, and it doesn't mean that there's a lot of growth and opportunity possible being a girl in STEM. So I've really enjoyed it. I think there's a lot of awesome things you can do as a person in STEM. So it's just been a joy to hear all the excitement you all have. Go to the next slide. Okay, so I know Angela touched on this, but just to expand a little bit, Tanya shared with me that her club got a project award. So I'm so glad to see that you all already are familiar with this. But yes, we have our project awards launching August 28th, actually. It's on Monday. So we're going to send out all of our outreach on Monday. So don't feel like you need to have anything together right now. You're going to start getting messaging via email, social media, the platform on Monday about the project awards opening. And just an overview of what we look for, what might get you thinking about what you could use the funding for. We use our go-to grow up model of leadership, which is the 3 pillars. It's leader of self, leader of change, and leader of peers. So when you think about how you might want to use this funding, that's really how I would start imagining it, is how would I want to encourage leadership skills for myself? Would this event or this activity teach me public speaking? Would it teach me how to manage a team? Would it teach me how to orient my work around justice and around inclusivity? How would it teach me and others to make change? So when it comes to STEM, am I showing girls how careers are possible in this area? Or am I showing girls how teams look like in this environment and how they might work together more effectively in this sort of environment? And then leader of peers, how are you looping in your club or your community, your friends? So keep that model in mind as you think about the project award. And we can go to the next slide. I think I have a little bit more information. So yes, we're going to look for 4 main areas in your application. The first being commitment to gender justice. As someone on this call, you're already doing that. Just show your interest in girls and gender inclusivity. A budget is really important so we can see how do you plan to use the funding. I would note that when it comes to small purchases, let me see, I actually wrote a note on this. When it comes to things like snacks and printing materials, typically our project awards don't fund that. That's more on the club side. But when it's larger scale, like you want to get an event space or help with transportation costs, or with Angela's activity, like the paper and pens and things like that, that's more what we're looking for, is more concrete materials for your event or your activity. So just something to keep in mind. The project should support your community, so that idea of leader of peers, leader of change, and then also support Grow Up globally. So we encourage virtual events if you're interested, but just an event that's inclusive. It's focusing on accessibility within your community, but outside as well. So that could be, you report out on it in our virtual community afterwards and let girls know how to do this event in their region. That's a perfect way to show that this is a more global view. Next slide. And then here's things to think about, questions to ask yourself as you're putting together your application. What are you trying to accomplish? Who are you serving? What cause are you serving? Where will this occur? Will it be virtual? Will it be on your school campus? What might that look like? And why are you doing this? What's the drive behind it? I think when you try to answer that question, really think of that leadership model again of leader of self, leader of change, leader of peers. That will be something we really look for, is how does it fit into that model. And then next slide, I think I've got another one on project. Oh, okay, perfect. And then at the end of all of this, so you get the project award, you have your awesome event and activity. We will be hosting our innovation lab, which Angela referenced earlier. So our innovation lab this year is going to likely be December 2nd. We haven't put out messaging yet, but once we have that confirmed, I'll let you all know. And during that innovation lab, it'll be fully virtual, and we'll have our girls report out on what they did with their project awards. So something to keep in mind as you apply, hopefully you get this award, you will want to report it out on our innovation lab event. And it's really fun. It's just like a celebration of all the cool things you did. So I hope we get to connect in a few months and I get to hear about all the great things you did. Next slide. Okay, I think that must have been my last one then. So yeah, let me just open it up. If anybody has questions, I'm gonna put my email in the chat. So feel free to reach out. It doesn't have to be about project awards or STEM. It can be just more general. Happy to chat. And I'll pause just for a few minutes if anybody has questions, and I'll pass over to Tanya after that.
Thank you so much, Halle. We learned a lot from you, and if you guys have any questions, just feel free to unmute or put it in the chat. We'll just wait a couple minutes. But actually, the question that I have is, in terms of the project awards, if you apply for it 1 year, can you reapply to keep funding the same project, or how does that work?
That's a good question. I would think you could. Let me double check. I will get an answer to you early next week. I wouldn't think that would be an issue, but I will double check and circle back with you, Tanya.
Okay, that sounds good. If you guys have any questions, feel free to put it in the chat. Unmute now. Email Halle too. She put her email in the chat. But we'll wait a couple minutes and then keep going.
Okay. Well, I'll stick around for a little bit, so feel free to message me in the chat and then definitely reach out via email if you need anything. Thanks so much, everybody. Really appreciate the opportunity. I see Rania asked a question. Does this grant have to apply to STEM? That's a great question. So no, when it comes to work I do, I'll be looking at the STEM things, but we also have it for sports as well. So I believe those are our main categories this year. It's either for supporting our STEM events or our sports events. And sports is similar. We're looking for projects, events that support gender inclusivity in sports. But I believe we're working with those two categories, either sports or STEM. Great question. Great question, Maya. So I will find the link and put it in the chat, but you can find it via our community platform. If you aren't registered for that, you can just go to girlup.org and it'll walk you through the whole steps, but I will put the link in the chat. It's really fun. We have a general leadership course and then we have a STEM specific one, and I'll link both. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, okay, great questions, everyone, and thank you, Halle, for answering them. And again, thank you so much to Halle for being here and sharing your work and Girl Up's work with us. We learned a lot. And I will be transitioning to our next speaker, Natalie. So if Natalie, you want to introduce yourself. Yeah.
Hi everyone, my name is Natalie Tang, and a little background on me is that I'm currently a junior at Valencia High School. I'm the co-vice president of the Valencia chapter of Girl Up, but I've been very involved since my freshman year, and last year I was a member of the activities committee. I'm also very involved with the National Charity League and the Reach Foundation, which are both nonprofit organizations focused on serving our communities. When I first joined Girl Up, I wanted to learn more about the various issues that affect women, and since then I've definitely done so. One of the first topics we discussed was the lack of support for younger girls in schools and homeless women with periods. The feminine products drive that we held that year helped me realize that I can really make a difference within my community, and being a part of Girl Up and helping the cause has been one of my biggest priorities because of it. You can flip the slide. In another one of our meetings, we learned about some statistics regarding women's education. And especially since my education is so important to me, it was very shocking and eye-opening that 62 million girls are not in school and 2 of 3 illiterate people are girls. Girls' education has become one of the issues I care about most, similar to many of our Valencia Girl Up changemakers. So in 2022, our lovely Valencia and SoCal Coalition President, Tanya, began planning the experimental design STEM program, which she proposed to the Reach Foundation. I briefly mentioned the Reach Foundation earlier, but a little more information about it is that it's a nonprofit organization dedicated to enriching the academic, athletic, and arts education of students within our district. And Tanya and I, along with a few other Girl Up leaders, are interns there. Tanya worked with the now Reach Foundation president, Ms. Giselle Nguyen, to orchestrate the program, reach out to local schools, and bring it to fruition by early 2023, which is what I'm here to talk about today. As Halle mentioned, we also received $1,000 in funds from the Girl Up Project Awards. Our goal is to provide girls with the opportunity to explore various areas of STEM in hopes they'll spark an interest and consider pursuing it in the future. So the EXPD STEM program does exactly that. After we Valencia Changemakers shared ideas for the curriculum, we began our pilot program, which consisted of weekly sessions after school at Valadez Middle School. We also started weekly sessions at Ruby Drive Elementary School. We encouraged the after-school instructors to send us mostly girls, but many of the boys were also interested in participating, so our sessions included some boys as well. During each session, we would have 1 or 2 scientific concepts to investigate through an experiment and a guided worksheet. So prior to each session, the volunteers would gather a little earlier to set up the materials and worksheets and talk through the experiment and how to lead it. And once the students arrived and are split into groups, the sessions typically begin with some time for the high school volunteers and younger students to get to know each other. As another one of our goals is to foster relationships between the Girl Up leaders pursuing STEM and the young girls. Especially since our program started with middle school girls, we wanted to provide them with a mentor and friend as they approach high school. Next, our club presidents typically introduce the scientific concept of the day and a general idea of the experiment before providing instructions to the students to form a hypothesis and passing off the students to their smaller groups with the volunteer. This is an example of one of our worksheets for the pendulum experiment, which exemplified the concept of frequency. We like to keep the worksheets and materials pretty simple to make sure the students can understand the idea and relate it to real life. And once everyone in the group has written down their predictions of what will happen, they conduct the experiment together and collect data and observations on the worksheet. For example, for this particular experiment, we used a ruler, string, washers, and tape to form our pendulum. The students explored the idea of frequency by timing how long it took for the pendulum to swing 5 times with a longer string and comparing it to the time it took for a pendulum with a shorter string to swing 5 times. And on the next slide is a video of us conducting the experiment at Ruby Drive Elementary School.
Sorry, I'm not sure if the sound's working.
So after we conducted the experiment, we recorded the data on that table in the bottom left corner, and we discussed the results and made our conclusions. And now that the volunteers were able to use the experiment as an example, we further explained the scientific concept and why and how the outcome happened. And as a large group, we all shared our results and the students were given an opportunity to share what they learned. We also discussed other real life examples of the scientific concept. So for the idea of pendulums and frequency, one idea was how your arms swing when you walk in comparison to how they swing when you run. When you walk, your arms are relaxed and extended, whereas your arms are bent shorter and moving quickly to build momentum and pace when you run. During our pilot run, there are some things that we found work better than others. One thing that we learned pretty quickly is that we have to limit the amount of students we can take. We tried to keep the groups fairly small, around 2 to 6 students per volunteer and 2 to 3 students per individual experiment and set of materials. However, once we did have 40 students with only 4 volunteers, and it was a little chaotic to say the least. 5 students ended up having to share 1 set of materials, so it was a little hard to get everyone involved. But regardless of the number of students, classroom management was consistently an issue for us, especially with middle school students who are a little antsy after school. We found that classroom management tactics like clapping your hands and 1, 2, 3 eyes on me definitely worked better with the younger kids, and the younger elementary students generally paid more attention. One of my favorite ways to help the kids understand the concepts better and maintain their attention is to compare the concepts to very basic scenarios that they see in their everyday lives. We also use rewards like candy as encouragement for the students to participate in discussions, as they tend to be a little shy even if they know the answers. Of course, they're always difficult students, so patience is always key. One thing I learned the hard way was to make sure all the students play close to the same role with the experiment. For example, we conducted an experiment where we made a large tinfoil boat and a small tinfoil boat and compared how many pennies it would take for each boat to sink in water. The concept we were exploring was buoyancy, so the point of the experiment was that the larger boat with more surface area would support more weight than the smaller boat. But since I had one student construct the larger boat and another student construct the smaller boat, they just saw it as a competition to see whose boat could hold the most pennies. Naturally, the student who made the smaller boat was a little frustrated when her boat sank faster, even though I tried to explain that that was supposed to happen. So the next time we conducted the experiment, we all made both boats together as a group, and we had an overall more successful experience. For me, being able to be so active in this program has been very rewarding in a few different ways. After hearing some of the girls tell me that they don't really like their science teachers or they find their classes boring, it's amazing to see them get excited about our experiments and feel proud of themselves when they have that light bulb eureka moment. Especially when since we're working in less fortunate communities with several kids who struggle to read, write, or speak English, or some of them even have behavioral issues, their understanding of these concepts and real life comparisons boosts their confidence. Watching their anticipation and reaction to the experiments and their ability to explain the concept to a friend who may have taken a little longer to get it made me feel not only proud of the students, but proud of myself, knowing that I was able to help make that happen. I know that we're doing something right when they ask me at the end of every session when we're going to be back again or if they can be in my group next time. And not to mention, my communication skills have definitely improved since I've had to work on being very clear and direct, yet polite and friendly. In the spring, we hosted a booth at Ruby Drive's Family Night, where we had experiments for the students to share their learning with their parents and siblings. One of our activities was something they had already learned after school, which was chromatography. So they already knew how it worked and were able to make a chromatography flower card to give to their moms for Mother's Day. We also had magnetiles and oobleck for them to experiment with while we explained how they worked. One of our students has developed a real passion for science, and she spent almost her whole afternoon at her booth, making different designs with the magnetiles and several oobleck balloon stress balls. Seeing girls like her shows us that we're accomplishing our goal of inspiring girls to pursue STEM, especially since her previous STEM background isn't very strong. Since we finished our last set of sessions at Ruby Drive, a number of other schools in our district have expressed interest in bringing the program to their schools. And we're hoping to expand in the upcoming years, not only within our area, but throughout all of Southern California and possibly even more in the future. If you're interested in bringing the EXPD STEM program to your school, you can check out our website with the QR code for a little more on how we got started and worksheet printouts for the experiments. After working with both middle school and elementary school students, we found that the younger elementary school students are more interested and willing to participate. They're overall a little easier to work with and they're able to get more out of the experience. So start reaching out to elementary schools and after school daycare programs at local schools. We're very fortunate to have the support of the Reach Foundation and the Girl Up Project Awards. And I know other districts have similar organizations. So consider contacting them or fundraising or applying for the project awards. The materials we use are household items, and most of the time they're reusable, but you might need to invest in a few extra items to have enough for all the students. If you're not a club president or a board member, you can still make a difference by encouraging your club to join the cause. Once the program is established in your district, you can get involved like I did, simply by volunteering regularly, getting to know the students and gaining experience. My best advice to you is to be prepared with a positive attitude and a smile on your face and just be patient. When we started sessions in our district earlier this year, I wasn't a board member, but I've attended almost every session and every club meeting since joining Girl Up. As a high school student who's STEM oriented, inspiring other girls to explore the field is very important to me, especially since it could potentially change their life by driving them to pursue a STEM career. We urge you all to start the initiative and bring up more opportunities to young girls who may not have much exposure to STEM. And I'm not sure if we have time for questions.
Thank you so much, Natalie. We'll do another virtual round of applause. And yeah, so thank you for sharing about the STEM program. It's also been a really important part of my Girl Up journey. And if you could just put maybe the link for the website in the chat. And I think we had one question in the chat. So if you just want to answer that too in the chat, Natalie. And then I think we should move on to our next speaker. But thank you so much for sharing about the STEM program. And I definitely encourage all of you to start similar initiatives in your area. We have a website with a bunch of information and advice. So definitely look at that. But yeah, now I'm really excited to introduce our next speaker, Jordan. So Jordan, if you just want to introduce yourself, you can get going.
Yeah, so hi everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. My name is Jordan and I'm on the New England Executive Board for the Coalition. And then I'm also a member of Harvard Girl Up. And next slide, so I could give a little bit more info. So as I already said, I'm also a student at Harvard University graduating next December because I've taken plenty of semesters off. I'm the reigning Miss Central New York in the Miss America organization, which is really cool. I'm studying math, physics with a secondary in psychology, and then I'm born and raised in the Bronx, New York, very proud to be there. But then outside of school, I'm a spoken word poet, climate change activist, TikTok content creator, and I'm also an ADHDer. So next slide. I guess a little bit about my STEM journey. I think it's been crazy up and down. I was telling Natalie about it last night. Like when I was in elementary school, I actually hated STEM, or it was very weird because I was always a little bit better at math than English. But when it came to science, I was just not a fan of the experiments. I understood the whole like problem solving thing, but I just didn't like the kind of tediousness of like, okay, now we have to measure how long this is and this, that, and the third. So I just decided like, you know what, this is not for me. And as someone who's like studying psychology, I've learned that that's actually a pretty common phenomena for young girls in elementary and middle school to find kind of one little thing in it, and then they realize that STEM is not always for them. So they kind of shut the door on it completely. So I'm kind of glad to be a part of that growing movement to change it. So I loved writing, good at math, but didn't really care for science. And then in 8th grade, I was like, maybe I'll be a surgeon, I'll be a doctor, because that's what I feel like every impressive young girl says at that age. And then in high school, I ended up going to a science high school. So I kind of had no choice to be fully involved in it. So I was taking all the APs, doing this, that, and the third. And I was kind of like, you know what, this is fun. You know, I fell in love with physics in my junior year of high school. My teacher was really phenomenal, just goes to show how important educators are in this space. But I think the best part of my high school experience was feeling really smart in some classes and feeling completely not in others. There were times when I was taking honors math classes and I was like, yeah, I'm definitely not doing what I need to do here. I'm trying my hardest and it's fun, but it seems to not be working. But then there would be other times in physics when I would do a whole problem with lots and lots of work and all the diagrams and feel really proud of myself for doing well. So lots of ups and downs there. And then now in college, I came to Harvard as a physics concentrator and then actually just recently switched to math this past spring. But all of my internships have been in marketing and I've done all this poetry and climate advocacy. So a lot of the times people are looking at me like, okay, Jordan, what are you actually planning on doing going forward? So I guess we'll find out whether I become a professor, whether I get my business degree, whether I become a poet, or really try to find some combination of all three. Next slide. So a little bit about life right now and STEM advocacy and also just how it fits into my day-to-day life. I always say, obviously for me as someone who isn't the biggest fan of experiments still to this day, I truly love like the exercise of writing a paper, which can be like really interesting. So being a student and truly being able to learn for the sake of learning has just been really awesome. Professors have been great. And I had actually my first female STEM professor in Harvard this spring, which has been lovely. And you could see this kind of like whiteboard of Sudoku and an excerpt from our paper that we wrote, which was really fun. And like being able to find your own kind of passion and interest in your academics has been really awesome in college. And I hope you all have a similar experience. And then I also have some old pictures from physics labs in the past and a screenshot of my TikTok. So as I mentioned before, I'm a TikTok content creator and I talk a lot about what it's like to be a Black woman in STEM at a private school older than the country and how obviously it can be isolating being the only person who looks like you in the room. But I also find it fun being able to just like be myself, and it can be a lot to feel like you're representing a community, but being able to just have fun and know how blessed you are and privileged you are to be in that space. And it just kind of inspires you to open that door for the next girl going forward. So that's been a really great opportunity. And from that and sharing my story, I was able to partner with Emil, which is an online learning platform. I think now they're known as Subject, but basically it's kind of like Masterclass and Khan Academy combined. They create these full-length courses in AP subjects so that students who don't already have access to APs can actually learn and take those classes. So they actually invited me to teach their AP Physics 1 class and Algebra 2 and Geometry, and over 50,000 students took those courses in the last couple of years, which is just incredible because I think I've only had 2 Black STEM teachers in my entire life. So to be able to be a young Black woman in STEM who's a teacher for thousands of kids around the country has just been something I will never take for granted. It's probably one of my favorite experiences to this day. Next slide. So I feel like being someone who has always loved writing since I was little, as I told you, who also really enjoys kind of like the physics and math still, I'm so happy to have been able to merge my passions. It kind of just goes to show that you don't have to sacrifice any part of yourself. You can just pursue everything that you love all at once. So I think it was 2 years ago, fall 2021, the National Society of Physics students saw some of my poems around the world and they were like, okay, we want you to write a piece about like your love for physics and how that also deals with like climate advocacy and how these poems kind of interact with each other. So that's what you see on the left. The piece was called Time, and it was really cool because I feel like in college we always joke that scientists cannot write. So glad to be a scientist who can, and also just share my unique perspective in that. And then on the right, as I mentioned, I'm Miss Central New York in the Miss America organization. So for my talent competition, I actually wrote a poem about physics. And it was a lot of fun. I feel like my junior year physics teacher in high school would be so proud, but also just having so many little girls after the competition come up to me and be like, oh my gosh, they were like, well, I love your outfit. I want your outfit. But also like, I love that you're a scientist. Like, I want to be a scientist. I want to be a professor. Like, this was so much fun. And it's being able to inspire young girls in that way has been awesome. And next slide. So as someone obviously who loves the whole writing and physics and science, I think it just kind of makes sense that one of my biggest advocacy lanes has been in the like climate change space. So I've been writing in this space since I guess like June 2019, like spring 2019. And I've been all over the place since. I've performed at a couple of college campuses and also have worked several times with the United Nations. And I'm actually seeing if I could do a collab poem with Girl Up and the UN soon. So check your inboxes for that in the coming weeks. But I've also been able to run the Everyday Environmentalist, which is a column at the Harvard Crimson, which has a monthly viewership of around 600,000 people. So it's really cool to be able to share what it's like being a granddaughter of someone. Like my grandmother lives in Puerto Rico. So as you know, lots of the hurricanes and natural disasters have been affecting the island. And then I also live in a very urban area, and we know that tropical islands and urban cities are both heavily affected by climate change. It's in very different ways, but obviously still getting some effects. So being able to share the personal side while with the little kind of like regular Gen Z feeling and growing up in a world where everyone's doing $500 Shein hauls and doing your Amazon Prime. It's like kind of a fun way to explore that while also I guess airing what everyone else has kind of been thinking, especially when it comes to eco anxiety and just this weird sense of hypocrisy and guilt in that you feel bad if you're not doing everything that you can in the climate movement. But at the same time, you feel like if you can't do everything, then you kind of feel like you should do nothing at all. So being able to voice those concerns have been really fun. Next slide, please. So just a couple of my biggest lessons learned, and this applies to both like in your STEM career, but also just life in general going forward. Like I always say, get exposure. This is something I wish I had done way earlier in my career. Like I didn't know physics existed until 11th grade, which like is fine. I think most kids like learn about physics in high school, but I didn't learn anything about coding until maybe my sophomore year of college. And I know that's changing a little bit now. Like there are a lot more programs that are exposing young girls to STEM programs. Like shout out to Angela, because I wish I knew how to code at a younger age. But please like do all that you can to learn about as many fields as possible. There are so many different ways to find your avenue. Like as I mentioned, like I really loved physics, and the part that I loved the most about it was the philosophical element of thinking about what is the universe and how is it created. But obviously much of your physics classes aren't like that. But now I'm having fun writing research papers about Sudoku. So there are so many different spaces, and there's definitely a place for you. And then kind of linking to that, don't be afraid. Like, or if you can, if you are afraid, just do it afraid anyway. I think a lot of the times as girls in STEM, you can get this weird feeling of imposter syndrome. Many of my friends, especially in engineering, have talked about how groups have shut them out in like labs, and they feel like they don't want to go through that experience again. But it's like you can be afraid and you could be fearful. It makes sense to be nervous, but at the same time, you should never let those fears hold you back. And then my kind of personal motto is just like say yes, you never know what could happen. Like I've always been passionate about like writing and climate advocacy, but I never knew that was something I could merge with my STEM advocacy as well. So making sure that you're just trying things no matter what, because I feel like the world has so much more for you in store that you don't even know about yet. And then last but not least, find joy in whatever you do. Never sacrifice your passions and always do what you love. I feel like especially with like the economy being the way it is, the millennials and all of their financial struggles, we find this weird like power struggle between doing what you love and then making sure that you're able to like provide for yourself and your family and like your siblings and cousins and stuff. But there's definitely a way to do both. And if you do what you love, my father has always said, like the money will come. Like don't stress, don't force yourself into a place that you feel like you don't belong in, because of course this life is yours and you're the only one who can live it the way you can. So that's what I have for today. And I guess just next slide for any questions. I would love to hear, I guess, any of your thoughts, fears, concerns, comments, all that stuff.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jordan. It was amazing to hear from you, and thank you for speaking for us. We can do a virtual round of applause again. But yeah, so if you have any questions, we can wait a few minutes and just put them in the chat or unmute for Jordan. She's an amazing student, scientist. And so maybe just to start with, can we hear your poem? Do you have it?
Yes, of course I do. I wish I had the full setup because like at the end, like there's writing on the board. It's not so much fun, but I could read it quickly.
Yeah.
And then actually, can you go back to that slide with it was like with the board, and yes, that one. And obviously I'm performing it while wearing that suit. The color of this suit has a wavelength of 620 nanometers. Photons, little packets of light, are more like waves and particles, and it is their wavelength that allows us to see color to begin with. In physics, we study things you can only see with one eye open and the other closed. Things that are too big to comprehend, also too small to comprehend. So really, we just study things with weight and impact, like those of words and moments of time. Like the time between you seeing something and when it actually happened. In physics, all perspectives are right. Whether the observer is standing in the wings or seated in the audience, the picture itself remains unchanged. And I think life might be that way. In this frame of reference, I see little girls with chalk-covered fingers playing hopscotch and solving math equations, where the product of challenge and confidence and the daringness to declare that future me is excellence. So maybe E really does equal MC squared. In this frame of reference, I see children accelerating towards their futures, soaring light years past all uncertainties. I see dreams becoming realities in this universe of possibilities, each one endless and true until they are realized by you. So that was my poem that I performed. I think it's called Meters Per Second. I always forget the names of my poems, but it was a blast writing it. And I'm so glad I was able to share that with you guys today. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, that sounded really cool. And I'm sure it sounded, oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm sure it was even cooler on the Miss America stage. But does anyone have any questions for Jordan? Thank you for sharing that. You
Yeah,
put
and I'll
them-
stick around in the chat. But yeah, thanks so much for putting on the STEM workshop. And I hope you guys, I just can't wait to see what you guys accomplish and getting the next young generation of women interested. What is Harvard look like, or what is Harvard like? I don't know. I'm so kidding. It's just like Harvard is like college. It's hard, but I think what's awesome is just the people that the university attracts. Obviously, it's very prestigious. You have all these like super cool professors and faculty. Like I think I was taking a class in psychotherapy in the spring, and the teaching fellow, like a grad student who works with a professor, he was like, oh yeah, she just came back from her book tour where she was talking about Donald Trump and narcissism, like just random stuff, and these professors like wouldn't even tell you about it. You just kind of find out randomly. But also the students themselves are really, really incredible. Like I met my best friend in my freshman year. He was actually my physics homework buddy, and he's currently a Fulbright scholar studying a year in Taiwan, like while teaching English, and like he wants to develop curriculum for students learning, like English students learning foreign languages. So it's really awesome to see just the drive and the projects that these students are creating. And yeah, I feel like, I don't know, something special is there, but also you kind of have to deal with the weirdness that is knowing that like Harvard obviously is older than the country, so it's responsible for a lot of the faults that exist in this country as well. So interesting dynamic, but I think it's a blast and I wouldn't want to be anywhere else.
Thank you, Jordan. And oh, you have one more question.
Yes, with all these different avenues that you're pursuing, do you have any additional advice on merging passions together? So I think the first thing is interesting. It's kind of like don't force it, which may seem contradictory, but when I started writing poetry, I wasn't thinking like, okay, my goal is to write personal essays or poems that are physics themed. It was more like, okay, I like writing poems, and usually the poems I write are about things I don't like in the world around me. And then I also like physics and math, and I'm just going to keep doing that. So what it felt like at the time for me was just pursuing both things separately, not like intentionally trying to keep them separate, but obviously it can be kind of difficult to merge them. And then eventually, like the more you pursue both of them, I think the more opportunities unfold. So I was first writing about climate change advocacy, and that's when the Society of Physics students saw that work. And they're like, oh my God, you just happen to be a Harvard student studying physics. Like, of course we want you to write something for us. So I think the opportunities will kind of unfold themselves. And it can be a little stressful, especially like we're talking about mental health and burnout more and more. But just kind of pursuing both lanes at full speeds and then kind of seeing what happens.
That's great advice. Thank you, Jordan. Okay, so we're a little short on time. If you have any more questions, maybe if you can put your email in the chat, Or
Yeah, for sure. And I'll definitely hang out in the chat, put my Instagram, all that stuff. But thank you guys so much for listening.
thank you. Okay. So, oh, sorry. So, thank you, Jordan. We're going to move on to our last speaker of today, Jessica. So, Jessica, I met her actually at my internship. She's super sweet and she has a lot to share.
Hi, I'm Jessica. I just want to say this is so inspiring. I didn't have anything like this growing up, and I really enjoyed this workshop. I get a little bit of imposter syndrome, so but it's okay, I'll share. So I grew up in Orange County. I actually went to Bolsa Grande High School in Garden Grove, and then I attended University of Southern California. I graduated in 2018. From there, currently I'm working in research in a nephrology lab at the Keck School of Medicine. Some of my interests are my dog, Marty. He's next to me right now. Boba, I love cooking. And I enjoy learning and I enjoy teaching other people. Next slide. So in high school, I didn't really do a lot of advocacy. It wasn't something that was like available at my school, and I didn't know how to get into any of that. So I think it's really cool now seeing all of you guys involved in this, and especially focused on women empowerment, which is something I didn't have, but I think it's also something I didn't really have to worry about back in high school. For me, our class split was pretty like even male and female, and particularly like our AP classes, there was a lot more girls in those classes. So I really enjoy volunteering. So in high school, I was involved in Red Cross, Interact, and Pink Ribbon Club, which is like breast cancer awareness. And then my STEM interests in particular, I was involved in STEM clubs. So we would do different projects, I think like competitions. So the ones that I remember were we had to build bridges to see whose could survive the longest underweight. And then we could see like which design made sense. And then also like the egg drop where we drop it from the bleachers to see how to protect those. And then my major involvement was in math club. So for our math club, we would tutor other people. So I just stayed after school every day and I would help anybody that came in and needed help with that. My junior year, my calc teacher mentioned something called Math Day at the Beach, which is held at Cal State Long Beach every year in the spring. So I wanted to do that. So we made a team, and our team was like, I think 3 to 4 girls and I think 1 or 2 guys. So for us, like we were very good about like getting girls to participate in these things. We didn't do good, but it was really interesting to try. And I remember it was like 30 schools around the Southern California area, and most of them I think were guys. So I'm interested to see how it is now. But if you guys are ever interested, because I saw something about math competitions, this is something you guys could consider trying. Yeah, so that's all. And then as president, I was president my senior year, and because I loved Math at the Beach so much, I took the initiative to look up different math competitions that we could try, and a lot of them were like mail-in things. So you had like a proctor, and it was like an hour or 2 long, and you would take the test, and then you would submit it, and then you would see like how the ranking was. So that's something you guys could consider. For me, I'm already going to give advice now. I have it at the end, but I'm going to give it now. So I have this one called classes. So in high school, I knew that I really enjoyed science and math, but I wasn't sure what I wanted to pursue in college. So when we were creating our schedules for senior year, I wanted to take as many. I wanted to take bio, chem, physics, calculus, and our advisors and our vice principals wouldn't allow it. They made it so that we couldn't choose everything that we wanted. So I kind of got together with all of my friends and we tried to advocate for ourselves and ask them to switch things around for us so that we could take all these classes. Because I think high school is the best time for you to really explore and see like what your interests are before you get to college. Because it's free right now. So eventually they allowed us to do like self-study and stuff like that. So that was really good for me. And I think it was like the first time that I really had to like advocate for myself. Okay, next slide. In college, I majored in biochemistry and I got a minor in healthcare studies. Um, I wasn't involved in advocacy again. I was more involved in volunteering. But that involved a lot of teaching. So we had a lot of elementary schools and magnet schools around our area. So we would go to those schools to teach them like health, science, tutoring, any of that they needed. My main extracurriculars were for Circle K International, which is the college version of Key Club, and then Alpha Phi Omega, which is a co-ed volunteering fraternity. And then on top of that, from those, we did a lot of work with the homeless population around LA. And one of the main things we did, we would go to Downtown Women's Center a lot and we would cook for them every week. And then we would host a lot of drives to get them supplies that they needed as well. And then because USC is like, they have a lot of, resources. So we would get resources from our student health center to donate to them as well. And then from there, I really liked teaching. So I became a California Science Center volunteer, which is across the street from USC. So there I would teach any visitors that came anatomy lessons. So I did that for about a year. So that's my uniform. The teal shirt is my uniform. So Tanya asked me to speak on this. Originally, I was a math minor because I loved math so much in high school. That's what I wanted to pursue. But I really love biology and chemistry, so I focused on that, and then I added a math minor. I loved my first class, and then when I got to my upper div classes, I just had a lot of trouble. Their teaching styles were completely different than my learning style, and I couldn't get them to match. So I ended up dropping that, and I did a minor in healthcare studies, which worked out for me because I learned about the healthcare system, the shortcomings, and all of that kind of stuff. Next slide. So now I'm currently working in research in a nephrology lab at the Keck School of Medicine. So I have two different jobs. I'm a lab technician. I love research, so it's good for me. And then I'm also a lab manager. So I kind of like oversee the day-to-day for the lab to make sure everything's running. So my lab work involves mouse experiments. So I do breeding, I do surgery, I do different experiments on them. And then I've also been involved in the cell culture work. So we have in vivo studies in the mice and then in vitro studies in cells. And then from there, we do Western blotting, tissue staining, a lot of microscopy. And then I do a lot of data analysis because I like doing that. And then on top of that, we have a lot of summer volunteers every year. Tanya was one of them. That's how we met. And then we have students during the year because we are attached to USC. And then as a lab manager, I keep track of all of our supplies. I do a lot of ordering and cost analysis, and then just general lab maintenance and lab compliance because everybody has to, every year we have to do training for different like lab safety, drugs, everything like that. And then I'm also learning how to do grant management and grant submission, so proposal writing and everything. For future plans, I'm planning to do a master's in health administration, and I would like to be more just lab manager. So I really enjoy managing the lab and organizing and all of that. As much as I love the science side of it, I think this will give me a good balance where I'm focusing more on management and grants, and then I can do a little bit of lab work on the side. Next slide. So I'm giving advice. I think Jordan already gave basically all the advice that I wanted to give. So I really think it's important that you aren't afraid to speak up and be confident. I know it's something that I think girls deal with more, being a little bit more shy and reserved, but you really have to advocate for yourself. And you really have to trust yourself and your abilities, because if you don't believe that you're smart, if you don't believe that you're capable, how will you convince somebody else? So you really have to trust yourself in that regard. And then speaking about that, you really have to be comfortable with rejection and failure. So you always have to ask for things, you have to apply for things, and you shouldn't really take it to heart. I think if you get a rejection, you shouldn't say, oh, I'm not good enough. It should just be, this opportunity wasn't for me. The next one will be for me. And something my PI told me was, the worst thing that can happen is somebody says no to you. But if you don't ask, then you're already basically in that position. So it's always better to just ask. And then I think the most important thing is you have to explore your options and don't restrict yourself. Coming from I'm a first generation college student coming from immigrant parents. And for me, it was like, you have to be a lawyer, you have to be a doctor. So I really restricted myself to, I'm going to be a doctor. And then I think once I got to college, I really took the time to explore all my options. And even though like when I was doing all my shadowing and everything, I really found myself gravitating towards research and then like managing. So at some point I just had to say, this is what I want. This is what I'm going to pursue because this is what makes me happy and this is what I like to do. I don't know, this doesn't really apply to being a girl, but just advice for you in college. I think it's the time where you can really explore who you are and be who you are. So you should really find a group of friends that you feel comfortable with and that make you want to be who you are. You shouldn't try to fit yourself into the group that you have, but you should try to fit your friends into the person that you want to be. And then I think that helped me a lot because all these photos, I've been including a lot of girls. So these are all of my college friends and they really helped me be confident in myself and who I am. So that's my best friend. She was my freshman year roommate. And then for college, you have to manage your time very well because you're basically on your own. So schedule well, always schedule lunch. Don't forget about lunch. And you have to schedule well all of your studying, but you shouldn't just study. You should also enjoy yourself, have your extracurriculars, have your time, your downtime so you don't burn out. And then I think Tanya wanted me to talk about how to get into research because I didn't get into research until my senior year of college. So just some advice to begin your research. If you want to pursue research, the best thing you can do is talk to your TAs in your discussions or your lab classes because those are smaller classes. And those are usually graduate students. So if you develop a good relationship with them, you can just tell them you're interested and they can help refer you to their lab or to another lab that they know is open. Another good avenue would be in your organization. So in a lot of my organizations, the seniors that were leaving would end up posting about it in our group pages saying, oh, my lab has an opening. Let me know if you're interested and they'll give you a referral. Another way to do it would be to talk to the professor, but I know in a lot of schools, the classes are really large, so it's a little bit more difficult to talk to them. But office hours is very good. And then my best advice for research is you should try to see what you're interested in instead of just applying to any research lab that you think you can get, because you really want to be passionate about what you're doing the research in, because we've had some summer students that I can tell they're just there to get the research done. But if you want like a good experience from it, you should really try to find something that you enjoy and you want to learn more about. That's all. I don't know if you have any questions, and I can leave my email if you want to talk about college or anything else.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jessica. Thank you. We learned a lot from your experiences too. And thank you for being a speaker for us. So yeah, if you could put your email in the chat, it's there. If you have any questions about college, STEM, anything like that, that's great. Jessica's a great resource for that, especially for research. She's done a lot of it, and it's definitely a great opportunity to be more involved in STEM. So I don't think we have time for last Q&A session, but thank you all so much for joining. I just wanted to say this is our first workshop of the year and it went really well. Thank you to all our speakers for helping us and sharing your experiences with us. We definitely learned a lot. We have a recording of this, so we'll share it later too. But just one last note, definitely follow our Girl Up SoCal Coalition Instagram if you don't already to get updates on our workshops and meetings. And finally, our next workshop, we actually have an official date for it, is on reproductive health and advocacy. So that's going to be on September 16th at 10 a.m. if you want to save the date now. But thank you for joining this one. I hope you learned a lot from all of our speakers, and that's about it for this workshop. Yeah. If you have any questions, definitely reach out to any of them or reach out to me if you want to be more involved. But thank you all for joining.
Thanks, Tanya. See you later.